Well, guys, we are finally here at that time of year. 2023 is wrapping up, and before we know it, we'll be at the beginning of 2024. And as you guys are all very well aware, everyone is starting to put up their best and their worst lists of 2023. Guys, now it's time for me to throw my hat in the ring. I am here to share my top 10 worst movies of 2023. But before I do that, this isn't quite right. I need the right wardrobe, I need the right background. But before I can even think about putting myself through the misery of mentioning these 10 films again, and even my dishonorable mentions, I need to give myself a pick-me-up. One moment. G Fuel, please give me the strength and the energy to get through talking about these 10 shit stains all over again. Here we go. I feel it's coming. You ready? Because we're about to rip and tear. Here we go. Now that is more like it. The time has come for me to share my top 10 worst movies of 2023. Now, to be fair, 2023 I thought was actually a pretty decent, in fact a pretty damn good year for films. There were actually more films I found to be more surprises and more films I liked and I loved rather than the films that I disliked. But were there some films out there that were just complete garbage, piles of excrement that I wished that I didn't put myself through? Oh, you bet your ass there were. A couple of guidelines that I must issue. Now, I know that the most of you have stuck around here really for the longest. I know some of you have stuck around since 2011, which, hey, I really do appreciate you for watching my content for that long. But for those of you who have never seen my work or my videos, first of all, I just want to say, hey, welcome to my channel, and I hope you guys enjoy this video. But still, first things first, I have not seen every single film that came out in 2023, especially the films that just did not look that good. Life is short, time management has become more of a bigger thing now than ever, and there were just some films out there that I simply just didn't want to watch. Second of which is this. This is my, and yes, my personal, my subjective list of the films that I disliked, of the films that I hated. And I completely understand that the films that I disliked / hated are not going to be the same as yours. That's completely okay because, hey, film is subjective, art is subjective. We all view art from different lenses. And if you enjoyed these films on my list, I'm happy for you. I just wished I was in the same boat. Before I continue on, I do have a couple of dishonorable mentions, and that's actually, believe it or not, I only have 4 dishonorable mentions. Like I said to you guys, believe it or not, there were actually more films that I liked that I disliked this year. But for these 4 films, why I didn't make it onto my top 10, consider yourself lucky they are not being mentioned, but I still don't like you nonetheless. And my dishonorable mentions are The Meg 2, The Little Mermaid, Cobweb, and the one that I know you guys are going to be shocked is not on my list, Barbie. If this was like, let's say, a 1 through 14 per se, Barbie would have been my number 11. But at the same time, I happen to have found a more overrated film than Barbie. This are all mentions issued. Let's get into the films that just put me to the 7 circles of hell. Let's get it on. Let's go! Number 10. I guarantee you are wondering, what film did I find to be more overrated than Barbie? Well, I'll tell you guys right now. Starting at my number 10 is Poor Things. Yorgos Lanthimos is a very unique and a very distinct voice in Hollywood, absolutely. The films that he creates are very unique films, they're very different films, and they're very weird and very bombastic films. Films that they get to be on a certain wavelength to enjoy. But when it came to Poor Things has such a specific wavelength that no matter how many times I tried to get on that wavelength, I did not find myself enjoying this movie at all. Emma Stone is brilliant in the movie. It's also beautifully shot, and Yorgos Lanthimos directs the crap out of this movie, absolutely. But at the same time, Poor Things is more than most of the time a case of style over substance. For those of you who enjoy this film, in fact, if you love this film, I'm happy for you, but on my end, I completely don't get why this movie had the appeal it does, and that is why now it's my number 10, but it is my most overrated film of 2023. It's one thing to dislike, or in some cases hate a film, but something entirely different when you're disappointed by something. And without a doubt, one of the most disappointing films, in fact, the most disappointing film of the year for me was Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire. This was, for me, the movie after Oppenheimer, after Spider-Verse, after everything I saw this year. This was, for me, my most anticipated film for the rest of the year. Zack Snyder making a Star Wars-like film that not only takes inspiration from Star Wars, but also Dune, Seven Samurai, Heavy Metal with his touch. That should have been one of the coolest movies of the entire year. But unfortunately, what we got here, at least what I got here, was a film that essentially was the epitome of, hey, take my homework, but please don't copy it. And as a matter of fact, that is exactly what Zack Snyder did. One particular thing that I didn't mention in my review, I wanted to mention it here, and that's the fact that there's gonna be a director's cut that is supposedly a completely different movie with a completely different tone. Why didn't you just release that movie in the first place? Why didn't you just release that movie instead of this movie? This movie had so much going for it, but it just felt like wasted potential. While this franchise may not have been the most consistent, as a matter of fact, it was more inconsistent than pulling out great stuff, but for the great stuff that came out, the stuff was great. But I gotta tell you guys, for the ending of a franchise, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom couldn't have ended the DCU in the more rougher spot. James Wan is a phenomenal filmmaker, and he's done more good films, at least in my eyes, than bad films. I really enjoyed this guy's work, so as y'all can imagine, when I was sitting down in the theater on Christmas night, I was constantly wondering how James Wan could have made a movie like this, and honest to God, truth be told, I don't think this was James Wan's movie. I don't think this was the movie that James Wan wanted to put out. As a matter of fact, I truly believe that there was some big studio interference going on, and if so, it absolutely shows. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom doesn't feel like a filmmaker's vision come to life. More than anything else, I feel like something that was just put on the assembly line with beautiful colors, but just colorful noise with little to no stakes. Rather than should have being a revenge quest movie where Black Manta was going up against Aquaman and Ocean Master, it was a film about global warming. I have hope in James Gunn absolutely deliver a great DCU, but for this franchise, I think this franchise really could have been something. It absolutely could have been, but unfortunately, this is how it ends. Number 7. Now, guys, it's time to talk about a film that was just simply put stupid, annoying, and obnoxious. Cocaine Bear. No other film this year annoyed me, got on my nerves, was more obnoxious, and just made me just go like, dear freaking God, more than Cocaine Bear did. Had Cocaine Bear gone in the way of leaning into its premise and actually had fun with that premise, possibly this could have been a really fun B-comedic horror film. But what I got as a result was a movie were characters that were grating on my nerves by every second. A bear that was barely on the screen. Cocaine Bear is easily not only one of the most annoying films I've probably ever seen, but it's also one of the dumbest movies I've ever seen. I just remembered this is one of Ray Liotta's last performances. This movie did Ray Liotta so dirty. Number 6. Coming number 6 spot, Five Nights at Freddys. This movie would have worked better as probably a 20 to 30 minute short film with a self-contained setting of a security guard just trying to get through 5 nights. That's what we should have been. What we got instead is a movie that barely even concentrates on, the premise of the games. What we get instead is a child custody film where our main character is trying to solve a crime by going into his dreams every night. Now sure, do not get me wrong, the animatronics looked amazing. I just wish the animatronics actually did things that were menacing, like, you know, they were actually in the games rather than forming a bond, building a table fort. And worst of all, by the way, the film is remotely scary as the film relies on constant, and I mean constant jump scares. I completely understand this movie does hit with some parts of Freddys fans, and you know what? For those of you out there who love this film, I'm really happy for you. But yeah, for me, as a Five Freddys fan, this movie just did not work. Number 5. We're here at my top 5 worst films of 2023. Y'all knows that these films just really put me in absolute misery. Coming number 5 spot, I have Expendables 4. This is a movie I actually feel really bad about having on my list because I actually know someone who worked on this movie. Yeah, I know someone who worked on this movie. As the person who worked on this movie, you know what? I'm really happy for you. I saw your behind the scenes photos and your videos, and this movie looked like it was a great time to make. But for me, as an audience member, I wish I felt that excitement time. The Expendables started off as a franchise that was a celebration of yesteryear's action heroes coming together and kicking some serious ass with some pretty incredible action. Expendables 4 takes that concept, disregards it entirely, and what we have here is essentially an action film with terrible directing, with stars that felt like they didn't want to even be there, minus Jason Statham, who actually was carrying the film, and some of the weirdest editing choices and some choppily edited action with some of the worst green screen visual effects of the entire year. Iko Uwais and Tony Jaa in this movie, and they're barely used in this movie? How do you barely use Iko Uwais and Tony Jaa? No need for any more. I think we're okay. We don't need any more Expendables films. Number 4. It's time to talk about some dicks. Yep. Dicks the Musical is my number 4. You all know that A24 is one of my favorite film companies out there. As a matter of fact, at least in my opinion, they have made or they have distributed some of the best films in the last couple of years. And it's their first musical. Dicks the Musical is full of not only some of the most obnoxious characters of the entire year, but it's full of some of the most unlikable characters of the entire year. It's annoying, it's irritating, it's shocking, it's over the top, and it's just doing those things just for the sake of trying to be the next cult musical like Rocky Horror Picture Show. Newsflash, guys, you don't just get the status of a cult movie just because you're aiming for it. That comes over the course of time because Rocky Horror Picture Show earned it. Not only does it try and be a cult musical, but tries to be just an outrageous version of The Parent Trap. There is a moment at the end of this film. Dear God, it's so freaking bad. Oh God. We're coming on to my top 3 worst films of 2023. These are the ones that really felt like I was going through hell. And speaking of going through hell, let's talk about The Exorcist Believer. You all know that The Exorcist is my favorite horror film of all time. Hearing of anything they were going to do with it, whether it was a remake, a sequel, a direct sequel, I was absolutely just vehemently against anything. Especially when knowing that the person who was making this film had already made a terrible end to the latest Halloween trilogy, and as y'all can imagine, I was scared shitless for this movie. They really, and I mean they really fucked this one up so much. It's one thing to be a generic Exorcist movie, absolutely, but it's something else when you're making a direct sequel to one of arguably the best horror film of all time, and the fact that this movie is a direct sequel to that movie, and it's generic, makes matters even worse. I'm not going to deny that the filmmakers are big fans of The Exorcist. It is absolutely clear with every single frame, But here's the thing to you guys, while they're fans of The Exorcist, it's like they forgot what made that film not only so great, but you know, scary. When it comes down to Ellen Burstyn, they treated her with such disrespect, and the fact that Linda Blair does come back for literally less than 2 minutes. What an absolute insult to The Exorcist. Number 2. This movie was my number 1 worst film of the year for a very long time, until, as you all know, I saw my number 1. This is a movie that, while admittedly I gave it a higher rating, like I think it was around like a 1.5, a 1.25, or a 1 out of 5. However, over the subsequent months, over time, I started disliking it and strongly hating it over time. My number 2 goes to Beau is Afraid. Another A24 film this year. As a matter of fact, this movie was brought to us by Ari Aster. Midsommar was a movie that I really liked quite a bit, but Hereditary, one of my favorite horror films, not only of one of the past decade, but it's one of my favorite horror movies, period. This movie is colorful to look at. The visuals look great, and Joaquin Phoenix does give a good performance. Absolutely, the man always brings it every single time. Everything else surrounding those two things is a movie that is either so over the top, like dialed further than 11. Their narrative choices just kept making me go, huh? And the runtime. Oh my god, the runtime. This movie is about 3 hours long, and it felt like a freaking eternity before this movie finally ended. And the further it kept going, the more it just derailed. And the more I tried to do something else, the more I just kept on going like, what in the hell am I watching right now? And the absolute worst of 3 hours, I almost forgot to mention one more thing. That thing. The monster. What the fuck? It's number 1. For those of you who have been paying attention to my channel throughout the entire year, I only gave 1 0 to 5 this year. This was a movie that mainly I was looking forward to. Yeah, I was actually looking forward to this movie quite a bit. I mean, knowing I'm a fan of the horror genre, and knowing that I was looking forward to this concept of taking a childhood icon and turning this icon into a slasher villain, and what could have been a fun, campy, and a really fun, gory horror film. But unfortunately, Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey was everything that I despised about movies this year. When it comes down to my numbers 2 through 10, at least those movies, there was at least effort put into those films. With Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, it felt like that there was no effort put into this movie. This movie only had, I believe, 10 shooting days with a small budget. However, after it became such a viral hit, knowing that, hey, we're turning Winnie the Pooh into a slasher movie villain, the filmmakers got more funding and they had even more shooting days. The filmmakers could have used those days and that money to construct a fun slasher film. What do we get instead as a movie that is not only so dull, so boring, a movie that could have been a fun movie, and it takes itself way too seriously. And the kills this movie, the kills were just uninspired, and they were just boring kills. Every time we saw a character dying, the blood is such the most obvious CGI blood spray every time. And the characters are the most definition of cardboard cutout characters that you just really do not give a flying fuck about. What in the power of great Scott was I watching with this movie? And by the way, get this, guys. Not only is there gonna be a sequel, but there's gonna be a cinematic universe of these movies. Not only is there gonna be a Bambi horror film, but also a Peter Pan horror film. No, thank you. One more thing I must mention. When it comes to the sequel, Did you all know that the director is essentially boasting that, hey, Winnie the Pooh is gonna use a chainsaw? Hardy fucking hard, man. And that is why, without a doubt, Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey is my worst film of 2023. This movie, and the words of my buddy Lucas, can go suck the devil's dick. Oh my god, that felt so good. That is gonna wrap it up for my top 10 worst films of 2023. Please comment down below, what were your top 10 worst films of 2023? And also, give me a couple of honorable mentions, let me know below. If you guys want to follow me on social media, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and I'm also on Twitch. So if you guys want to follow me on all those social media platforms, all the links and the usernames are in the description below. I hope you all enjoyed my top 10 worst films of 2023. If so, please hit that like button, also subscribe, and don't forget that notification bell for my latest review goes live. If you guys want to see my previous two reviews, please click right there or right there. And of course, until my next review or video goes live, I will see y'all tomorrow for my top 10 favorite movies of 2023.